All right, so here's our lesson 21.2. We're still talking about factored form, but today we're going to talk about when things look just a little bit different. So this first example that you see here is really what we did today, and it's actually one of the exact problems that we did today. Just want to make sure you remember how to do that. So we've got our little kind of puzzle set up here. And remember, our top number is our multiplying number, which we get from the end. Okay, so that's going to be -8. Our bottom number is our adding number, which we get from the middle, -2. And so if I think about my two numbers that can multiply to -8 and add to give me -2, all right, those are going to be -4 and +2. So we talked about today, to use those, we can go ahead and write factors, which are going to be x minus 4 and x plus 2, right? Keep the exact same signs. And then we did roots. And remember, roots are where these this parabola will cross the x-axis. So we know this parabola is going to cross the x-axis at 4, 0 and -2, 0. And remember, when we do roots, they end up being the opposite of the factors, because anything in parentheses we have to think opposite. So -4 becomes +4, +2 becomes -2. Now, if you notice this second example, something should kind of stand out to you as being a little bit different. And that might be that there's a number in the front. So remember, in general, we hope that the number in the front is going to be for us a GCF. So just like what we've done before, we're going to take the GCF out. However, remember, with this pattern that we're doing, we're not trying to write it in vertex form, we're trying to write it in factored form. So we don't just want to pay attention to the first two numbers, we actually want to pay attention to all three numbers. So we're going to divide this 2 out of every single number here, giving us x squared plus 3x, let's see, minus 40. And now we should be able to come up with our two numbers. So my top number is -40, my bottom number is 3, which makes my two inside numbers, let's see, +8 and -5. So then my factors are going to be x plus 8 and x minus 5. And just like with the GCF that we've done before, this 2 has to come down to be in the very front. So for the most part, some of the times when you have a number in the front, it's going to be a GCF, and that will mean that we can just divide it out of all three numbers. So the trick is going to come, what happens when this number, whatever you think the GCF is, doesn't divide into all three? What if you can't take a common factor out of all three numbers? So let's look at what some of those examples might look like. All right, so you may notice in this example, I've got a 2 at the front and a 1 in the middle and a -15 at the end. So we think 2 could be the GCF, but I can't divide any of these other numbers by 2. So we've got to fix that. The note at the top about bottoms up, you're going to see that here in a minute, why that's relevant. So the first thing we need to do, this is going to seem a little odd, normally we don't have a number here at the front, so I'm going to move this number to the end with multiplication. Now remember, anything we do, we're going to have to undo later, so we're just doing that to give ourselves a simpler problem. So now my problem is going to read x squared plus x minus 30. All right, that's more like what we're used to because there's not a number in the front, which is what I need. So now I want to set up my little puzzle, and I know my top number is going to be -30. My bottom number is going to be 1. That's from this x in the middle. So I need to pick what are my two numbers that I can multiply to give myself that. And if I think about that for a minute, I'm going to come up with +6 and -5. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and write my factors then. X plus 6, x minus 5. Okay, well, that's helpful, but that doesn't actually give me the answer because remember, I moved that 2 by multiplying it to the end. So two things we have to undo. One, we need to undo the fact that we moved it to the end, and 2, we have to undo the multiplication. So to undo the multiplication, I'm going to divide. All right, so if I divide those, that gives me x plus 3 and x. Now -5 over 2 doesn't divide or simplify, so I'm going to leave that as -5 over 2. And then think about this as like a circle. So since the 2 moved to the end, I've got to somehow bring it back to the beginning. So to do that, I'm going to do what we call bottoms up, which means I'm going to take the bottom of the fraction and bring it up. Now this time it doesn't go into the very front, like in front of the parentheses, because that would mean it's a GCF, which it's not. It needs to come in front of this x, which means my final answer is going to be, my final answer then is going to be x plus 3, all right, because that factor is not going to change. But then my other root is going to be 2x minus 5. So notice how that 2 came to the front as a whole number. So here are my factors. And then if we want to name our roots, remember we just use opposites. So the first one's going to be -3, 0. And the other root we actually have to refer back to before we did the bottoms up. So the other root is going to be +5/2, 0. And remember, I'm getting that, if you follow, I'm getting that from before I did bottoms up. All right, let's do one more and see if you can kind of follow this method again. All right, so this one's another example where 6 could be a GCF, but it doesn't divide into either of these. I can't divide it out of all 3 of those numbers, so to fix that, we got to move 6 to the end by multiplying, and my similar problem is going to be x squared minus x minus 12. So now I'm coming up with 2 numbers that multiply to give me -12, add to give me -1. And when I do that, my 2 numbers are -4 and +3. So my factors are x minus 4, x plus 3. But because I moved that number to the end, that 6 to the end, I've got to bring it back. So I'm going to divide by 6, which is going to give me x minus, now 4 doesn't divide by 6, but it does simplify, so I'm going to say -2/3. And then again, 3 doesn't divide by 6, but it does simplify, 1/2. It's at this point, if you wanted to, that you could go ahead and name your roots. It's a little easier to see before you do bottoms up, so the roots here are going to be +2/3, 0, and -1/2, 0. And then, remember, we got to think about the circle. It's got to finish out. So because the 6 went to the end, I've got to bring it back. So I've got to do bottoms up here, which is going to make my final factors. So my final factors are going to be 3x minus 2 and 2x plus 1. All right, so those are your answers. You've got your factors and your roots. You may want to watch one or both of those examples again to just kind of track what's going on before you get to class tomorrow.